Ladies and gentlemen, as we start tonight's program, our intention was, of course, to dissect that Jones versus GECOM case a little bit more, and we will certainly get to that. But the more pressing news would be what happened at the OAS today. And just before I invite Mr. Ram for his comments, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Luis Almagro, the Secretary General of the OAS, he said, and I quote, "The current situation serves no purpose in Guyana. We call to stop using the judiciary branch to avoid bringing a solution to the country. It is time to make decisions and protect democracy and the will of the people expressed in these elections." Ladies and gentlemen, I must tell you that today it was a demonstration of the world against the evil, against those who are willing to kick democracy aside. And it was the world, it was the entire OAS with one voice. There was not a single member state that chose to be silent, not a single member state, including Venezuela, that chose to not ask for democracy and for the will of the electorate to be respected. So, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a telling afternoon at the OAS, and I would like to welcome Mr. Ram for his opening comments by asking Mr. Ram, sir, I felt a little bad, if I may start like this, that our chief attorney in this country chose to say the words he did at the OAS by misrepresenting the CCJ's decision on the recount. Over to you, Mr. Ram.
First of all, thank you very much for having me, and good evening to all your viewers as well as your co-panelists. Indeed, it was an interesting afternoon. We saw statements from the Secretary General, statement from Prime Minister, designate Mark Phillips. I thought Mark was extremely good. The United States representative to the OAS, Ron Saunders, quite frankly, the only two persons who stood out in a negative way is our Foreign Minister, Karen Cummings, and the Attorney General, Mr. Basil Williams. Yes, indeed, he misrepresented the decision of the CCJ, and one has to wonder whether this was deliberate or whether he has not read the decision of the Caribbean Court of Justice, to which the Chief Justice, in her judgment yesterday, drew several references. I think it's all part. What came out of it all, though, is the mockery that is being made of democracy in our country. We are now 141 days after the elections, and I think it's 577 days since the no confidence motion. And what we have is a demonstration of dictatorship, bullyism, and sheer lawlessness, posing and clothing themselves in the process of the law. Well, something must be uniquely good or uniquely bad that Guyana could have achieved the most litigated elections ever. Today marks the ninth case, or the ninth stages of the case, because you have some cases that went from the High Court to the Court of Appeal and to the Caribbean Court of Justice. But this is the ninth time the court will be will be engaging the elections. And almost on every occasion, it was done by the APNU AFC. And we must not pretend that this case was brought by some Messenger Jones. Harman said today that the incumbent APNU AFC coalition will take the application adjudicated by Chief Justice Roxanne George Wiltshire to the next level of the court system, the Court of Appeal. All this business about using Yolita Jones and Miss David, and now we've got Messenger Jones. We are making a mockery of the legal system, and we're making a mockery of democracy. Meanwhile, Guyana suffers. Our economy is in a dreadful situation. Our democracy is almost non-existent. Article 9 of our Constitution says the people speak through their representatives in the National Assembly. Well, we have not had a National Assembly for 18 months. So the whole place is in complete mess. The APNU AFC keep prolonging this farce. I think I said this is not about law, it's about lawlessness. And I am a bit disappointed in my professional colleagues. But maybe I should stop there and let you, because I can go on to the other points I want to make.
Let's come back to the points indeed, Mr. Ram. And let me welcome Mr. Selwyn Peiters joining us all the way from Canada. Mr. Peiters, welcome. And we started the discussion tonight. I don't know if you had time today to have listened to the OAS, hearing, well, we call it a hearing, the meeting that was going on. And we pointed out, Mr. Peiters, that not one member state decided to even decline from commenting on the issues. They all spoke, and they all spoke against what is happening, and they all called for the will of the electorate to be allowed and for democracy to be allowed. Mr. Ram also spoke that some of the presentations were indeed very, very, out there. And we know, we also saw that the Canadian High Commission shared their statement later. Mr. Louis Almagro shared a statement later. But over to you, Mr. Peiters, with regards to what you would have discerned from the OAS meeting today, sir. Kindly unmute your mic. Yes.
Yes. Good evening. Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone, including my friend, Mr. Ram, who I haven't seen in a while. Yes, I did.
How are you doing, Selwyn? Good to see you again.
I did listen to the OS presentation. I was really embarrassed by the Attorney General's presentation, where he misled the OS on what the import and what the gravatar of the CCJ case was. Fortunately, we had Mr. Nandalal there that righted the ship. But I mean, you're right. All the OAS representatives were at idem on the Guyana situation, and that's that should send a message to the current government that they should leave. They should leave now. They're embarrassing us on the public and international stage. I mean, this is completely unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not complicit, and yet I'm embarrassed.
Right. But Mr. Peiters, right back at you with this question. I think one thing that Karen Cummings and Basil Williams achieved today was to tell the world that they're not coming out anytime soon.
And that may well be the case that, the government the government that was elected in 2015 suffered a major defeat, and they expected that they would have been in power at least for the next decade. I discussed the last time the politics of fear, the politics of race, and all those kind of things, and indeed the current APNU AFC administration will do whatever it takes to stay in power, and we haven't seen the next plan yet, but certainly there are other things that could be in play after all the court processes have been exhausted. I mean, the last time we spoke, if you recall, the last time yourself and I spoke about the abusive process of the court. You'd recall that, and the court said exactly that. You know, the judge was quite clear that that this here is tantamount to an abusive process, and that's why she asked for cost submissions, and she's going beyond what normally obtains in public interest litigation, because she felt that all these issues were dealt with before. They rescued the Cicado, and a message must be sent through cost sanctions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Ram, if I can ask you this, sir, a lot of persons, I want to get back to the Jones versus GECOM case and the decision as of yesterday afternoon, sir. And if we could start with Ms. Kite's binding of the hands of GECOM at that stage. From an attorney perspective, sir, what would have been Mr. Ram's thoughts when Ms. Kite would have said what she said yesterday afternoon? And I would presume to think without even consulting with her client, but she must have gone there knowing what her client would be thinking maybe.
Well, you know, that's exactly what so disappointed me. You're assuming that was the position of her client. I am not sure it was. I'm not even sure it was appropriate, because that kind of softness is what tends to encourage people like Basil Williams and Roysdale Ford and others, the former Attorney General from Trinidad, that it's almost become automatic, but that's not how the court system operates. So I think the point was well made by attorneys for Ali and Jagdeo, that look, there was nothing before the court at that time. And so I don't understand why Ms. Kim Kite was so amenable to letting this matter drag on, because what is happening, GECOM itself is becoming complicit in this delay after delay after delay. And, you know, Selwyn practices most of his law in another jurisdiction. And you mentioned the question of cost. Mm-hmm. I think it's about time the court considers wasted costs, because these lawyers, and I mentioned Roysdale Ford and Basil Williams. Now, here a court gives a very damning pronouncement and judgment in your matter. You, without seconds after the Chief Justice had spoken, decided that you would appeal. Are you representing yourself? And well, we probably know, but at least lawyers ought to behave to a certain standard of ethics and decorum. When you have a case like that, when a decision goes against your client, you would want to consult your client, advise your client about the possibility of success, and then decide how you move. But here it is, Basil Williams and Roysdale Ford, knew without hesitation that we must appeal. But of course, those people were carrying out the agenda of Joseph Harmon, the strong man of the APNU AFC, who has decided, well, look, we are taking it further.
Right.
I still believe there are enough people in our country, including the Chancellor, including the head of our defense force, that will not allow an unlawful government to stay in place. If the chairperson of GECOM did declare Irfan Ali as the president, and she calls on the Chancellor to swear Irfan Ali in, I can't see how, under any circumstances, the Chancellor would refuse to send someone else in her place. She does have that choice. Now, once that is done, David Granger is no longer president. He's an imposter, and he's an occupier, unlawfully and unconstitutionally, of the highest office in this land. And I don't think our society, our defense force, have a stomach for that type of conduct. I don't know what Selwyn might say to such a situation.
Right. Selwyn, I want to, before asking your comment on what Mr. Ram would have said just now, I want to go back to what you said. Indeed, what Mr. Ram said earlier too. Indeed, the CJ yesterday, in handing down her decision, referred to myriad persons cannot be permitted to engage the court with multiple applications and so forth and so on. But Selwyn, one of the things that I want to seek your clarification on, the Chief Justice yesterday quoted the previous decisions, and she referred multiple occasions to res judicata. She referred that these things were decided, especially in the case of superior courts made decisions, and therefore she could not even dare to pronounce on them. With that being said, Mr. Peiters, is it that the applicant is now going to the Court of Appeal to listen to points of a case that the Court of Appeal had already decided on?
Well, they are, but the thing about it is they have a very, very difficult hurdle to overcome, because these are decisions that were only made months ago. And you have to meet a very strict test to tell the court that its previous decision was wrong and should be overturned or should go in a different direction. The Chief Justice has already ruled that this case is res judicata. I mean, Mr. Ram was correct that instead of precipitously jumping to the conclusion that they're heading to an appeal, perhaps they should have sought the client's instructions first before making that announcement in the face of the court. But making that announcement in the face of the court could simply mean that, hey, we're going to play this out for what it's worth. And that's why I spoke about vexatious litigation. And that's why the Chief Justice said what she said. Because if they don't get the message that, look, a declaration that you're a vexatious litigant should bring a stop to this litigation, then this is it's a game that is going to continue on and on. And with a game in litigation where you have the state treasury that's funding the litigation, I mean, they're deep pockets, and it's the taxpayer's pocket that can go on and on and on to prop this government up in power for as long as possible. But I mean, we have to see what the Court of Appeal says this time around. I mean, hopefully it's a different panel from the last panel, because I mean, I'm not sure what my views are on some of the justices that seem to be making consistent mistakes in terms of their rulings. You know, we had the no confidence case which Mr. Ram was involved in, and Sharon Das. We have the case recently where the Caribbean Court of Justice had to tell our very brilliant Court of Appeal justices that the Constitution says what it means and means what it says. I mean, all these embarrassing sagas, I gotta admit, they're depressing and they're causing me sleepless nights. I'm embarrassed beyond belief.
Mhm. Thank you. Mr. Ram, in terms of yesterday, Basil Williams, in the closing moments at the Court of Appeal, he said this matter will go, he agrees that this matter will go right up to the CCJ. Was he then therefore announcing a confidence, going to what Selwyn Peiters said, a confidence of a win at the Court of Appeal? And what does it say to justice and the judiciary?
Well, lawyers tend to be optimistic people, and so maybe he's just being optimistic. You know, Basil is strangely extremely confident of what he has said. The point is, if the Court of Appeal were to rule in his favor, and I use this subjunctive word because I can't see that happening, then clearly there's going to be an appeal. Now, I share Selwyn's concerns about the composition. How do we put together a team to hear this matter? I believe, and I suspect, the team has already been named because I understand there's a case management tomorrow afternoon.
Mhm.
Are you aware of that, Joe?
Yes.
No.
Yes, there is you.
Okay, great. I
Yes.
didn't.
So that
Okay.
that suggests to me that the panel has been selected. So we don't know where it's going to go. It's clear that they will take it. You know, these cases require an inquiry itself because governments don't contest elections.
Mhm.
Parties do.
Yeah.
Now, is the APNU AFC paying their legal bills, or are we taxpayers paying those bills? And somebody's got to answer for these. And I raise the question again, whether people like Royce Ford should not, and Basil Williams, should not have wasted costs against them. That I think is the legal term around common law jurisdictions. This is a complete abuse, and you know, it is so cynical. They asked for 28 orders or declarations in the Messenger Jones case. I think they got one. They got the question of jurisdiction.
Mhm.
Do you know the appeal comes back with 28 instances, grounds on which the appeal is sought? 28 grounds. Now, I don't know. I regard our Chief Justice, Madam Roxanne George, an outstanding jurist.
Mhm.
All lawyers get difficulties. They don't win a case and they think the judge was not, she didn't see the point. But to tell the Guyana Court of Appeal, which will have two puny judges, because I'm not saying that the either Brassington Reynolds or Justice Don Gregory will sit in this matter tomorrow. So if that happens, you either have to the chancellor will have to decide that, look, I'm going to participate in this Court of Appeal decision. Otherwise, you'll be bringing two judges from the High Court, subordinate to the Chief Justice. And for Basil Williams and Royce Ford to point out that the Chief Justice erred in law on 28 matters in her decision, to me, just defies logic. It defies understanding, and it certainly defies law, as lawyers, proper lawyers would know it.
Right. And Mr. Peters, the CJ in her ruling yesterday, I really believe if in the court she was allowed to use some more colorful language, she would have probably used it. That's just my humble opinion, because she was extremely expressive. She went to the point to identify what paragraphs were cut and paste from the Moore case and the David case to this one here. And she basically ended up telling them that all you did was change the order around and add some words. And this is the same thing you're presenting, and the decisions will therefore have to remain the same. Sir, Mr. Peters, have you ever seen something like this before in your practice, in any of the Commonwealth countries you practice in?
I mean, Guyana is a unique case, especially since December of 2018, when this government was brought down by that no confidence vote. I mean, she's right that these are all titular applicants who are dressed up as aggrieved, but they're representing really an organization, which is the APNU AFC.
In fact, Mr. Peters, if I may, just for the sake of clarity for the viewers and listeners, in paragraph 79, the decision reads, indeed, although couched in different terms, this application for the most part mirrors that in Moore and in effect is similar to that of David. That
Yes.
is extremely harsh.
No, it's reflecting the reality. It's reflecting the reality that whoever it is that is behind this litigation, whether it's Basil Williams or whether it's Roysdale Ford or whether it's the other person, I think is Moore is his name, not Moore. Let me check his name quickly.
Well, there was a David case, there was a Moore case.
No. I got the guy's name. Let's see what the guy's
Okay.
name. Neil Boston is the man's name. Whether it's Boston, Ford and Williams are really the intellectual authors behind, and Mayor Robinson are the intellectual authors behind these titular applicants or these nominal applicants. You know, it's all the same case dressed up in different ways, and she wasn't harsh. She was reflecting the reality, and that's why I said, and I say it again. Perhaps at the Court of Appeal or at the CCJ, the judges may want to speak about vexatious litigation.
Right.
And Mr. Ram raised a point about costs against the lawyers. We have that here in our jurisdiction, where lawyers who continue to abuse the process of the court, they're personally held liable for the cost consequences. And perhaps in this case, as it goes through the pipeline of the judiciary, some court may want to consider costs against the attorneys. Send a message, because they're the same attorneys that have appeared in each and every one of the cases.
Of course. Mr. Ram, on that point, I would like to ask your opinion, because, sir, you are both a chartered accountant with years of audit and finance practice behind you, as well as an attorney at law. Mr. Ram, today in our elections watch, Mr. Gildari and I, we had a question that we thought we want to ask you tonight. The Trinidadian lawyers in this case are being or would be retained by a local Guyanese. Is there any way behind the scene, Mr. Ram, that wire fraud and investigations for those things as to see who's paying these people, that a case could be made out on behalf of the people of Guyana to demand such details be made, because taxpayers are worried that the state's money is being used behind the scene?
I don't think we use that North American term about wire fraud. I'm not aware that we do. But it's clear that this series, this saga of these election cases will themselves be the subject of, at the very least, an investigation. That investigation may very well recommend some form of criminal action. As I said, we have to understand very clearly, political parties contest elections. Yes, the chief elections officer was made a party to this case, and immoral as it is, he may have a case for the expenses to be borne by the state. Basil Williams claims that he was there to protect the Constitution. I'm not sure how confident we should be to have someone like Basil Williams protecting our Constitution. That has its own ramifications. But it's clear that lots of matters have got to be addressed. And,
Right.
that's part of the problem as we look beyond these elections. And, the longest road has the longest line comes to an end. It must end. So
Mr.
it will happen. Sorry.
On a technical perspective, can the Court of Appeal resurrect the dead? The CCJ basically said is the recount, the results of the recount. The CJ yesterday insisted that it is the result of the recount. She basically said in paragraph 77, the 10 declarations cannot be resurrected at this point in time. That, of course, will be one of the matters going to the Court of Appeal. In your opinion, sir, can the Court of Appeal resurrect this?
Although the Court of Appeal is superior to the High Court, we must remember that particular issue was decided on by the Caribbean Court of Justice. Right. So the chances of that happening, I think, are zero.
Yeah, but Mr. Ram, the same point again to you and then to Mr. Peiters. Basil Williams today, notwithstanding all of this, had gone and still deferred and deflected back to paragraph 52 of the CCJ's decision to say, hey, the CCJ did not do this or the CCJ did not mean that. So, Mr. Ram, my point is that they are going to go to the court tomorrow and next day with this face and this air of you never said this and you never meant to say this. That's their approach.
The one good thing about the law, it has its faults, but if we don't have the rule of law, we don't have civilization. Yeah. The one good thing is records are kept. Judgments are there, and we will know who is telling the truth and who is not telling the truth. But, it's unfortunate that it has become as basic as this, that the CCJ, the pronouncements of the CCJ. Now, I can tell you, I was unhappy with the CCJ in the no confidence motion case because I thought there was a statement they made about cabinet being a lame duck. I thought that was entirely inappropriate, and the APNU held on to that to negate the Constitution, which required that elections after a no confidence motion, first of all, cabinet falls automatically, and that was the ruling by Chief Justice Roxanne George. It was not litigated further up about the timing, yet the CCJ, in my opinion, made a loose statement. It's arbiter, it wasn't part of the ruling, and that's what the government used. So right. I suspect we don't know who will be the judges tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll know. Mm-hmm. I suspect at the level of the CCJ, you will get a fairly similar panel. There may be a change in one or two, but the records are there. The 4,000 pages of who said what, and it's such a tragedy. I feel embarrassed to say this to Selwyn because he's a North American lawyer. he probably made the right decision. That we have attorneys general who would be so craven, who would misrepresent to a hemispheric organization, the Organization of American States, that you would say something as clearly misleading and dishonest. And quite frankly, it's just a three-letter word. It's a lie.
Mhm. Correct. Thank you. And Selwyn, indeed, I mean, back on the same point as well, because it has been such an embarrassing day for Guyana at the OAS, I can't help but cringe every time I think that it was only yesterday that the CJ took pains in her decision to say you can only look at this paragraph if you look at the subsequent and the aforementioned paragraph. She said that explicitly, yet he heard none of that and went with his singularly chosen paragraph to the OAS, sir.
Yeah, well, that is what you call misrepresentation. But lawyers have a duty not only to their clients, but they have a duty to the courts and they have a duty to the administration of justice. If it was in our context, if it was in Ontario, that attorney general would have been sanctioned by either the Law Society or some other body which governs lawyers, right? We had this situation in Trinidad, for example, where even the Chief Justice wasn't above the law, and the Chief Justice conduct was subject to scrutiny all the way up to the Caribbean Court of Justice. So, I mean, the lawyers in Guyana, including Mr. Ram, because Mr. Ram just mentioned my name, and so I'm going to go after Mr. Ram now. The lawyers in Guyana cannot be so complicit to allow the Attorney General to get away with what he's getting away with. And other lawyers, there is a council that deals with lawyers' conduct and misconduct, and somebody have to take it to them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Mr. Ram, any comment there, sir?
Thank you, Selwyn. A little under the belt, but I'll accept it.
And
Mr. Ram is my friend.
Yogi, if I may jump in here, the pernicious actions of a few has wreaked considerable damage to Guyana's image and reputation, and that even if it's satisfactorily resolved, it will take a generation and significant institutional reform to repair that damage. That statement there by Bruce Golding to an international arena such as the OS Permanent Council at such a forum, how damaging is that to Guyana at this point in time and to the coalition?
And who is the question to?
Both of you guys, maybe even to you.
Selwyn, you want to go first?
No, you go ahead, Mr. Ram.
Well, and I think that was based on the color of the hair rather than the length of the hair. Let me get that clear.
Both of you guys got long hair.
Now, we have all been very critical of our Constitution. We've been critical of our court system. We've been critical of the blind loyalty of the masses. We've been critical of the press. But if you were to do a sober assessment of what has happened in the face of these unparalleled challenges, institutions have stood up reasonably well. And therefore, we must not fall into, to use Freddie's words, miasma of negativity and pessimism. It's paradoxically one of the great beneficiaries of what the APNU AFC has done is the PPP and succeeding governments, because what you have here is a lowering of the bar by political opposition parties, and that's a real tragedy. We have great things. Think of the young people. I keep saying about those people, those youngsters who went out there to do the counts. What about the persons who defended the ballot boxes night after night? There's a lot we can take out of this. What I think we need to say, Leonard, is never again must this be allowed to happen. Our institutions have been subjected to immense strain.
Correct.
But the country has not exploded. The government has given very little in terms of COVID relief, other than to pay public servants to stay home. But even that, I don't criticize that. I criticize the bloated public service we have. So think about it.
Mr.
We
Ram,
have not collapsed.
Yeah, Mr. Ram, if I may, on that point though, I believe that Basil Williams and Karen Cummings were literally boasting to the OAS today that all of this y'all talking about, and there is no problem in Guyana. The people are very peaceful, and there is no protest, and there is nothing going on in Guyana. So why all of this concern? And I felt that was a very poor statement for them to make, because they're really misrepresenting the people and the mood of the people in Guyana.
Yes,
Did they have a mirror in front of them?
No, they were at pains to do that. They were at pains to do that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I meant that sarcastically.
Yeah.
They are the real problems. The persons who will lose most out of this. Ramjatan has spoken about dead meat. Well, this is rotting meat. The AFC is rotting meat. It's a tragedy that a party that has such widespread support, the PNCR, has been taken down a road where it is all part of the complicit election rigging, with the danger of an electoral coup. Because if they were to get their way, thank goodness for the caliber of our judiciary, the decision that was handed down yesterday. I am certain, as I was certain about the no confidence motion case, that the essence of that decision will be held up, and it will become one of the cases that will be regularly cited and quoted in the West, not only the Guyana law reports, but the West Indian law reports, and I hope the Caribbean law reports, because it was erudite, it was learned, and you talk about what kinds of words. Roxanne is very polite and she very strict, Bishop's girl and so on. But she did raise the question of the Lone Ranger.
Yes,
if you recall.
That's very true. That's very true. Selwyn, I know that both you and Mr. Ram would want to say that, under normal circumstances, you don't pay heed to certain words being used in public space. But after 140 days, certain words have different import, even though they might be hackneyed phrases. So yesterday afternoon, Aubrey Norton, was on air, and he said that the court was political. He was speaking of the decision of yesterday, and that the court made a political decision and not a decision based in law. And I felt after 140 days, that was a very, very dangerous statement to make about the court. Mr. Peiters, what are your thoughts, sir?
I mean, the difficulty is that, the president of Guyana spoke some time back about, I believe he was speaking to his supporters, telling them not to get into scholarity, not to get into attacking the judges, and to bringing down the administration of justice. That is exactly what Norton did yesterday. He tried to bring the administration of justice into disrepute, to say that the judge is a political tool and she has political masters. I mean, I agree with you, that was such a dangerous and unfair statement. But then we live, well, not we, because I don't live in Guyana, but I'm Guyanese. But Guyana seemed to be a place where people can say anything as long as they have a certain profile and as long as they're associated with a certain political party and get away with it. What Mr. Norton did and said yesterday, I agree with you. It was unacceptable and it should be condemned in the strongest possible terms. And I join with you in condemning it.
Well, Mr. Ram, it went even further because his interviewers went to the next stage and said that, do you think that, like the CCJ, or do you think that the CCJ and all the courts have been bought out? And his response was not a no. His response, let us not pronounce on that yet. That was his response. And I felt this was even lower than the earlier response, knowing that he has a case, he and his party has a case in front of the Court of Appeal. And so this is like shooting across the bow at the Court of Appeal. If you don't decide our way, one, we're going to call your decision political, and two, we're going to say you're bought out.
Well, let me say this. This is not one of the worst things that Aubrey Norton has said of anyone. I'm not trying to trivialize it. Of course, it's serious. And this raises the question of contempt of court. This is indeed a serious matter. He's an executive member of one of the parties in the government. And, at some point, David Granger has to stop being the coward that he is and take some leadership. He has got to draw some lines. And on the point of what was said, I did not hear it or see it myself. I'm assuming it was on television. Yeah. Now, the chairperson of the Broadcasting Authority is himself an attorney at law. And this is something that he ought to be interested in, despite the fact that he's come out of the chambers of one of the leading powerhouses or self-appointed powerhouses in this government. He has a duty to do this. And if I were to get a copy of that particular tape, I will be forwarding it to Mr. Leslie Sobers and confronting him and asking, what are you going to do about this? Because we cannot destroy our institutions. How can you say your country and your society are based on rule of law, and then you set out to destroy the very institution that preserves the rule of law, to which each and every one of us has to go at some point if we want to assert our rights. What kind of lawlessness? But, as I said, I am not at all surprised by what Aubrey Norton does. Not at all. Sherrod Duncan, Christopher Jones, all these people. James Bond, another attorney at law. Those guys are trying to pull Guyana down because that's where they are. And it's incumbent on us, the older ones that you call Mr. and the younger ones that you call Selwyn, take their role seriously.
Yes. So Mr. Ram, I want to address the point you made about Mr. Granger. Now, Mr. David Granger cannot anymore, it's impossible for him to distance himself from anything, because the last time he came out, there were two defining moments. One was when he came under the tent at the Recount Center, and he said, opposing Basil Williams, he said, I am speaking on behalf of the government, nobody else. So he showed that he had a voice and he could speak. He showed that he had a voice and he could dissent when he disagrees. And the other defining moment was when Joe Harman decided to go on the attack against the international against the world that were speaking out. David Granger came out and he endorsed he endorsed Mr. Harmon's attack on Bruce Golding, particularly Owen Hart and so forth. So that showed that Mr. Granger, therefore, is the intellectual mind that has to be held responsible for these things. Your comment, sir. Mr. Ram.
Of course he does. He's the president, and he's the leader. He's the president. He's a presidential candidate, and he's the leader of the major party in the coalition. So there's absolutely no excuse for Granger accepting responsibility. But you know, there's another side to Mr. Granger. This cowardice, especially in the face of Mr. Harmon and Mr. Bond and Aubrey Norton. But the other thing is how he changes his tune. I saw our Foreign Minister Karen Cummings today ask Anil Nandalal to withdraw some remark about Granger, whether the word lie was used, I'm not quite sure. But he has been known to shift his position time after time. Whether, look, he probably now in a psychologically delusionary state, because that's the only thing that can explain his saying that I will abide by the Constitution, or I will abide by anything GECOM says. And as soon as GECOM goes to do something, you get your surrogates to stop GECOM from doing it. Granger can't be that weak. And therefore, if he's not that weak, he's very dishonest. And that's a tragedy. We all should be very hesitant and embarrassed to say that our president is not honest. When I read words like the president is a hypocrite, you know, you think, no, I don't want my president to be described as that. Mm-hmm. But Granger invites all of these things and more. And Granger has brought down the majesty and the elegance and the aura of the presidency of Guyana. He represents, he's our head of state, he's our president, and he has let every one of us down. And he has won. He don't forget, you know, Yog, he had said the Chief Justice has our opinion, and he has his.
That's right. Yeah.
He reduces a judgment of the High Court to an opinion. No, it doesn't work that way. But it's a pity. Granger has done considerable damage to this country. I'm hoping that you young people will help to restore it. I don't give up hope. The biggest loser in all of this will be the APNU AFC, because what do they now go and tell not only the independent-minded people, but their own supporters? I have been lying to you all along. He said, Harmon told him he was there on the 5th of March when he said, we have seen the numbers. Mm-hmm. Well, Harmon was lying through his teeth, and Granger was happy to accept that kind of thing. Did he ever say, let me see those statements of polls that we all want to be silent about? No, he is a coward.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Ram. Mr. Peiters, sir. There's a question here that we want to pose to you and or Mr. Ram at the end of your response. Is there a possibility that the CCJ as the apex court could be approached for a writ or a mandamus to instruct GECOM to carry out its business without any further delay?
That's a good question. It would be interesting to see if somebody can invoke the original jurisdiction of the CCJ. I haven't thought about it before, but it would be interesting to look at the Treaty of Chaguaramas, especially in light of all the statements made by the Caribbean community leaders and the OAS and everyone else. and to bring a claim. As a matter of fact, I was looking at some of the possible claims that could have been made in respect to abuse of process, in respect to conspiracy, and all that sort of stuff. But somebody can bring an application of some sort compelling GECOM to act on the recount numbers.
Great.
Maybe Mr. Ram will do it.
Mr. Ram, the same question to you, sir, and you might recall the name of the person, Mr. Ram, one of your former students, Mr. Jerome Mahays. He is the one that sent in that question.
Okay. It's an extremely interesting thought, interesting question. We know that the original jurisdiction of the Caribbean Court of Justice is essentially to adjudicate over the Caribbean single market.
Mm-hmm.
So then you will get this question of jurisdiction being argued. But it's still certainly, if not now, what we need some good academic writers to start exploring these new areas. Now, but the same results could possibly be achieved by the CCJ actually giving a consequential order. Now, I was a bit disappointed when in the no confidence motion, no consequential order was given. And you can rationalize that. Well, you say you must have elections by a certain day, and GECOM decides we're gonna screw things up. So unless you can enforce something, don't give it.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the declaration, there is nothing now holding back the Caribbean Court, the Court of Appeal, from saying, you know what, we will step out of our crease, but not out of our jurisdiction, and to say we are giving a consequential order now that GECOM must make the declaration based on the recount.
Mm-hmm.
Either they can do it, or if it reaches the Caribbean Court of Justice. Because remember, in the earlier case, the St. David case, three things were sought, and Justice Saunders was very clear. Look, we were called upon to adjudicate over a very narrow range of issues. Yet, having pronounced, and if you remember the last page, but one, I believe, having pronounced on those three issues, he then went on the court. He was speaking for the court unanimously, saying the votes that were counted, that were declared at 115,000 votes that were set aside, that action by the CEO was void and of no effect. So I think even if it does make a consequential order, if it makes a pronouncement as your apex court, that pronouncement has tremendous weight. And look, how long more are these guys going to hide?
Right.
The Harmons and the Vincent Alexander and the Keith Lowenfield, where do they go after all of this is finished?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ram. So just for clarity then, this current case that seems to be heading to the CCJ, ladies and gentlemen, today at the OAS, the potential date of this current case may go on up to September. That's what they said, up to the 1st of September. And then who knows what new cases might be coming up again. So, Mr. Ram, just to clarify then, this current case, by the time, if the COA rules one way or another, and it ends up at the CCJ, the aggrieved party, given the nature of what's going to the CCJ, can ask of the CCJ to make such pronouncement or consequential orders to bring an end to this thing?
A short answer is yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Now, I want to just get back to the APNU AFC itself, Mr. Ram, on a purely political question on makeup of APNU AFC. Mr. C.N. Sharma, Mr. Ram, has been on air saying that he thinks a declaration should be made and Mr. Ali should be sworn in. But Mr. C.N. Sharma's party, his political party, and the WPA and other parties that have dissenting members still remains part of the coalition. Is it, sir, that if these smaller parties could make pronouncements of pulling away from the coalition, that can be a demise of the coalition that would be holding on to power?
Well, I would have thought it would be fundamental enough if any one of these parties was to say, and you know, there are not many parties, you have a few individuals, the WPA, what is it truly a party at this stage? But there's a lot of protecting visas at play in all of this as well.
Yeah.
But you know, C.N. Sharma and Savitri Sharma, having made their statement, decide, well, you know, I'm not going beyond that, and I'll go and celebrate the 75th birth anniversary of this president who is unlawfully and improperly. And now, technically, he's still the president, but we know he's illegitimate. He might not be legal, but he certainly is illegitimate. And if the Sharmas truly wanted to act on principle, they would have said, we can no longer be part of this illegality or this illegitimacy. But, you know, other than Mr. Dominic Gaskin, we talk about how many youngsters have taken a position. Selwyn himself came and I'm sure he would have been back in Guyana for the recount had we not had the problems of COVID. But look at the other side. None of the academics. Where is the University of Guyana and the University of Guyana Workers Union? Where are these people? Where are the WPA Overseas Association? We saw a statement by Arif Bulkan and his colleague from Canada, Alisa Trotz. Now, and you know, I don't think, I wouldn't call name, but I was talking to a friend the other day. How can one explain that self-respecting individuals cannot call a spade when you have the most transparent attempt at rigging of an election taking place by Mingo? Not one of them, David Hines, none of them, Lincoln Lewis, Eric Phillips, not a single one of them has had the courage to say that was a fraud. And I said I'm an optimist, and I'm hoping that this will end well, and that Keith Rowley is not as right as we at times tend to think he's going to be.
Right. Mr. Peiters, a lot of Caribbean countries have had their elections after us and already have their successful and successive presidents in place. Now, you know, Suriname, Mr. Bouterse, who, you know, has gone through so many personal issues himself, he is today out of power. And November 17th, which would have been a couple of days ago, was nomination day in Trinidad, and they're heading to the polls on the 10th of August, I think. How are the Guyanese in Canada reacting, sir, to what's happening in Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean with regards to these elections?
Well, we had, as you may know, we had a major protest here in Toronto outside of the U.S. Embassy. We also have a lot of petitions that are going to the Foreign Minister and the Government of Canada in respect to Guyana. We also have the ambassador in Guyana to Canada dealing with her colleagues in Ottawa on the Guyana issue, and we had the Secretary for the Americas. He issued a statement recently. So in terms of Canada, Guyana is Guyana is on the radar because a lot of Canadian assets are in Guyana. And so not only the Guyanese community in the diaspora, which Canada is, are concerned, but Canadians are also concerned about the situation in Guyana. And that's why at some point earlier I said that I'm embarrassed what's going on in Guyana, because people do ask me about the situation in Guyana and how do you explain it? How do you explain an election that occurred on March 2nd, and people from Canada knew that I was there as an observer in Guyana for that election? How do you explain an election on March 2nd and it's going on to 5 months and there's no declaration as yet? And people are doing all within their powers to cling on to power that they have lost. It's simply unacceptable.
Thank you. Mr. Ram, you would have commented a little while back, that a lot of persons, there's a mistaken notion and with the interchangeable use of shared governance and inclusive governance. I don't know if you're aware, sir, but as of yesterday or today, the Guyana Chronicle had in its publication a new group that is now calling for shared governance. What would be your comments, sir? Because a lot of people feel, how can you call for shared governance after holding this country at ransom for 140 days? Some people obviously want to have power through the back door now.
Well, first of all, I don't know who these people are. I've seen the report, and we should be talking. We should talk about everything. But first and foremost, we have to bring these elections to an end. We have to restore government. We have to restore democracy. We have to restore the parliament. We have to get a budget. And then as we move forward, we should be talking about how do we make Guyana into a better place. But you referred to that I've spoken on this issue before. We have quite a significant amount of power sharing. Power sharing does not only mean everybody sits, gets into cabinet. Look, if you have competing philosophies, you have a Labour and you have a conservative government, or you have a liberal government. That's what politics, competition brings out the best in us. It shouldn't necessarily bring out the worst. What we have is a political party. And that's the elephant in the room. We have a political party that is never prepared to accept democracy. Is never prepared to feel that it must be out of power. It controls some of the biggest regions, the whole of Region 4. And you tell me where power sharing is in Region 4 or where power sharing is in Region 10. You think about it. So this call is another set of hypocrisy and opportunism. On another television program, I had asked David Hines, let us talk about power sharing. Tell me what you mean. My view is this. We ought to have more devolution. I'm not talking about partition. The regions, there's no reason why a region that produces so much of the bauxite or forestry products cannot get a better share of that revenue. This is all, and we need to see this, in my view, as it is. This is a small clique of persons in power with interests to protect. And you talk about Aubrey Norton. All these people are paid by the state for doing political work. And they see their jobs at stake. This is what it is. It is crude, it is undemocratic, and in many cases, it is pure and unvarnished racism at work.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Peiters, Mr. Granger celebrated his 75th birthday. a couple of days ago, and a lot of Guyanese felt that maybe that's why he was not giving up. But I think after his birthday went by, they realized there seems to be more in this. He would certainly be 80 years by the time it's 2025. As a young man with your legal profession behind you, in front of you, sir, and seeing the nature of the lack of youthful participation in the last government, what would be your thoughts of the reshaping of a PNC slash APNU going forward, sir?
I mean, there are a lot of young, brilliant persons who are affiliated with the PNC and the other parties that form that coalition. But let's focus on the PNC, for example. The PNC has a lot of brilliant intellectuals, whether they're in Guyana, in the UK, in Canada, in the United States. But those are people that are at the margins, and those are people that are not sort of in the decision making right now, that can say to David Granger, that can say to Aubrey Norton, that can say to people that form the clique at Congress Place, what you're doing is going to set us back for generations, right? But those are the young people that are speaking out. And they're speaking up because they do not want Guyana to resort to demagoguery. They do not want an autocratic state. Mr. Ram speak about racism. I mean, there's racism within the PPP. There's racism within the PNC. I just saw some dirty comments about me with monkeys, with emojis of monkeys. And I was even criticizing the PPP. The person didn't listen to what I had to say simply because the person saw blackface. The person had all the monkey signals on Priya Jagdio's page, and you can go and look at it yourself. But I mean, there's a young cadre of intellectuals out there within the PNC that needs to show these octogenarians that, look, what you're doing is setting us back, and you ought to sidestep, you ought to let Ali govern for the next 5 years and let people work on the field to bring back the confidence in this party. There would never be confidence in the PNC for generations, given what has happened here. A lot of people are completely turned off with this 5 months of uncertainty and this 5 months of a bold attempt to stay in power when you've lost power. I mean, and you're using the courts as a crutch to stay there. I mean, you mentioned David Granger's birthday. Happy birthday to him, but it wasn't a happy time for most Guyanese who were struggling with COVID-19 and struggling with this electoral uncertainty that's going on. David Granger ought to show bold leadership. What David Granger has done by his words and his actions, and I want him to hear this, David Granger. I want you to listen to this quite clearly. You've put your legacy into the gutters. Robert Mugabe was a great leader in the beginning, and Robert Mugabe sullied his reputation by becoming an autocrat, by becoming a demagogue. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, David Granger, your quest to cling in power, or whether it's people that are forcing you to stay in power when you do not want to, it's really sullying your legacy. And the unfortunate thing that happened is that your children and grandchildren will have to wear it.
Thank you. Mr. Ram, with regards to sanctions, sir, we have had two guests on a program last week, former State Department officials, and they spoke extensively to sanctions and what could happen to Guyana if a government decides that they're going to stay in power regardless of the will of the electorate. Sir, today's statement, parting statement at the OAS by Basil Williams, speaks to a government that does not seem to be thinking that they will have to come out from office, regardless of how the GECOM rules. Indeed, Karen Cummings reminded everybody that Granger said he's going to respect the declarations of GECOM if, that little caveat was added. And of course, that if would be based on Granger's own interpretation as to whether GECOM followed the law or not. Mr. Ram, the sanctions obviously therefore doesn't mean anything to a lot of these people, or at least they're not behaving like so. But we do know that APNO AFC commissioners, for example, at least one of them that I know has his green card. We know that some of these people are having dual citizenship, but they're not behaving any way that would calm the anger of citizens on the streets, and this is heading to a point of no return, Mr. Ram.
Let me first of all say to Selwyn, I feel badly for you, Selwyn, but the fact that you're prepared to come back on television and speak shows that you will not allow that kind of abject stupidity to deter you and to silence you.
Right.
You have my support and friendship, continuing friendship, Selwyn. I think it's very sad that we are in a position where sanctions have already started. They tend to get worse because as you notice Moses Nagamoto was one who kind of tried to mock the Americans. Now, America is not a perfect society, as we've seen. And you know perhaps, Yog, that I was in Grenada when the invasion took place. I don't think they always behave in the best of ways. They've got lots of skeletons. But on this occasion, and this is not America, this is Canada, this is the UK, this is the European Union, this is the OS, and this is the CARICOM, the most legitimate interlocutors, our brothers and sisters, where we feel at home. You could go from one Caribbean state to another and you feel that, I'm still at home. So that what they're doing is tarnishing our reputation. If you think about it, Venezuela has sanctioned, Syria has sanctioned, Iran has sanctioned. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the sheer number of countries, Guyana is facing the almost universal sanction. And I believe there isn't a Guyanese who doesn't have strong family ties with the United States of America. And it will affect us, but personally. But if economic sanctions are taken, we're going to find things, the most basic things like toilet paper. So there's so many things that can go that we can lose out with. If, for example, they were to move against the financial system, you look at the lines at Western Union. It's who you think are going to suffer.
Correct.
So I don't believe this bravado and this front that's being demonstrated. I don't take it very seriously, because none of them, they love when Parliament breaks for the 2 months and to go to the United States and fraternize with all the party groups, as they call them. Mm-hmm. This means a lot to them. What you have is what you call it, res gestae or something. The last convulsion of people who are on their way down. And I don't mean, I don't wish bad to any of these people. They're, after all, our fellow Guyanese. But we cannot, whatever it takes, if it takes sanctions, then so be it. Sanctions are better than intercommunal violence. That's my
Correct.
position.
Thank you,
So
Mr.
if that's what it takes to restore democracy to our country, long live sanctions.
Thank you, Mr. Ram. And indeed, Mr. Peters, I'll let you know too that while you were talking, I immediately went there and I reported it. So I also took action while that was happening, because I think you are right, sir. And that is a conversation I'd like to invite you for a future discussion on, because we need to start having a very open dialogue. We need to start having very open talk about race, because there's been racism and racist posts from both sides. In fact, one of the things we were happy to see, both Leonard Gildari and I, is that a guy who chose, and I have to say this and say this openly, because our Muslim brothers and sisters have become incensed that a gentleman chose the name of a name, Leonard, that Rahman Rahim is actually a phrase in the Muslim prayer. Bismillah Rahman Rahim. And so the person chose that name to threaten the chairman of GECOM. However, the person came on our show, on our daytime show, and started to post a lot of racist accusatory stuff and so forth. So the good thing is that one has been caught by the police, but we have no tolerance for any hate, racism, or, ladies and gentlemen, I noticed there's been one person, Mr. Jeremy Marks, who we blocked immediately for cursing on our show as well. No, I'm sorry, not on this show. So, Selwyn, it's been good to have you here on this program, and we have certainly learned a lot from you, sir, with regards to especially that interesting paradigm of how do we look at this case going ahead. I would want to invite your closing comments here with your thoughts, of course, as to do you think the APNU AFC are going to engineer another case after this one?
And before he goes there, maybe you could put in this. Today, Venezuela would have kind of lectured Guyana. And this is a country that last year we would have joined in the OS to condemn the Nicolas Maduro government with regards to the elections, which was vowed to be not credible. I would like to hear his thoughts about Venezuela now lecturing us.
Well, I mean, it just is sad commentary. It just impoverishes us all as Guyanese, given what is happening with Venezuela.
Right.
They're a country where millions of people have fled because of food-related and political-related persecution, and here they are lecturing their neighbor Guyana, and we have a court case against them where they haven't even shown up to defend. So, I mean,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, two thieves make God laugh.
Yes, and ladies and gentlemen, that's not why we laugh. We didn't take on that.
But let me say this. Let me say this very quickly. I mean, there has to be serious consequences with respect to cases before the court that lack merit and are abusive in nature, right? There has to be serious consequences for wasted costs by taking unreasonable instructions from clients or providing unreasonable advice to clients, right? Mm-hmm. And that is what seemed to be happening in this case. We have wasted costs, and we're going to have more costs thrown away at the Court of Appeal, more costs at the Caribbean Court of Justice, and maybe the courts can make it a point of dealing with it strictly on a solicitor client cost basis with no sort of discount. If Mendez, Nandalal, and all of them show up representing various parties, they provide their actual costs, and the losers have to pay it through their lawyers.
But the sad thing is they might be guided to think that anyhow is Guyana has to bear that burden, because they might just saddle the state with the cost. But thank you, Mr. Peiters, for your comments, and thank you for being with us here tonight. Mr. Ram, your closing thoughts, sir, especially with a happy note, I must say that this CJ quite strongly in her decision yesterday referred to the Ram case and said that is set in stone and it has to be followed.
you know, anything that contributes to strengthening our society is good for the country. It doesn't matter which name goes to a case. It's whether our jurisprudence develops. Let me say, I noticed you've been practicing some ageism, and you're talking about octogenarians. You know, I'm a proud septuagenarian, so please bear that in mind.
Thank you, Mr.
I lose
On a
count.
serious note,
Sorry, Mr. Ram.
we await tomorrow to hear how the case develops. For one thing, you cannot blame the Court of Appeal. They have been very prompt in dealing with matters and giving decisions. I would like to think that our people, my fellow Guyanese, will continue to demonstrate responsible behavior. People have every right, including those who voted for the coalition. They have every right for their voices to be heard in the National Assembly. Obviously, those who voted for the PPPC and the other parties have an even greater right because they are being denied. And you know, I think somebody said yesterday, justice delayed is really justice denied. So, but our country has survived, and we can only hope that with the good wishes of people like Selwyn, Peiters, and many people out there, that they will help to stand up for Guyana. They'll provide positive support, and that out of all of this, our country will evolve more united, stronger, and with a greater appreciation of what democracy, of which free and fair elections are extremely pivotal, is really all about. So thank you very much for having me tonight, and good luck to you people.
Thank you, Mr. Ram. Thank you, Mr. Peiters. And ladies and gentlemen, we are about wrapping up our program for tonight. Let me remind you, join Mr. Leonard Gildari and yours truly tomorrow on our regular daytime elections watch, COVID watch. We have a lot to discuss tomorrow. And I think tomorrow at 3, we will be switching over to that case management matter, Leonard.
Yes, we will. I think I'm waiting to get the exact time. It is in the
Great.
afternoon, I'm understanding. So we're going to do, when it comes up, we do that.
Thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, do have a great night, and remember to please stay safe and stay out of trouble, and say no to racism by not doing, by not saying, and by not incriminating yourself, as well as not sharing any of the trash that might be on social media. Play your part and play it well. So ladies and gentlemen, stay safe. It's been a pleasure to have you here on Kaito Radio in room 592. Thank you to the technical team of Kaito Radio. As we say bye-bye to you, do have a great night. And remember, say a prayer for this beautiful country of ours. It is still the best place on God's given earth. Do stay safe. Bye-bye now.